So welcome, everybody. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our discussion around big data and sustainable development. I'm Tansy Whalen. I'm the director of NYU Stern's new Center for Sustainable Business. We just opened up shop in January, so we're thrilled to be hosting this event. The mission of the center, for those of you who don't yet know us, is to help current and future business leaders develop the skills, experience, knowledge they need to manage and lead organizations in a resource-constrained world, to learn how to manage environmental and social risk, but also to look at how you apply sustainability or sustainability lens to innovation, to competitive advantage, to creating value for your company and for society. So that's us. We're really pleased to be talking tonight and hearing from our great panel and moderator about how we harness big data in the service of tackling some of the big challenges that we're all confronting today, whether we're academics or civil society or business or government or just individuals. We have a host of challenges, and governments came together last year to tackle those challenges through developing the Sustainable Development Goals and signing on to those. And in doing that, we now need to figure out how we actually implement those and how we hold governments accountable and how business and civil society can help assist with that. And to do that, part of the secret in figuring that out will be to figure out how we set targets that we can track and use data to help us do that. So we're really looking forward to hearing from our speakers tonight. Before we go there, I'd like to introduce our co-host, Michael Block, who is the, let's see, I have got the exact right words. He's the founder and executive director of the Sustainable Practice Network. And the network is an organization that is co-hosting here tonight. And many of you, I know, are from that network, sustainability practitioners. He is also the founder and president of SPN Business Ecology Consulting Services. So I want to turn it over to Michael to say a few words.
Thanks, Tansy. And we are really thrilled that NYU has started a Center for Sustainable Business. I think that it's an important new addition. We've always found that the best and the brightest really do come from the sustainability world. And so just a brief introduction to the Sustainability Practice Network. We are a volunteer organization for those of you who are not part of SPN. We've been alive and kicking for about 10 years. We have one sole mission, which is to raise awareness of sustainability-related issues and to develop a network around these issues because we think that they are absolutely urgent, that you can't have a prosperous world without looking at key issues like climate change and resource constraint and security and changing disease vectors and stakeholder pressure and et cetera. So we'll try and find your emails and invite you to join SPN if you'd like. And otherwise, let's see what else I can tell you. Our next panel, for those who are interested, will be May 4th. It's on net zero energy, and like this panel, it has representatives of most areas of, let's say, academia, business, government, and NGOs, because he really takes the entire, aspect of society to move these issues forward. So thanks for coming, and thanks for having us.
Thank you. And now it's my honor to introduce our moderator, Professor Vasant Dar, who runs the Center for Data Science at the Stern School of Business. He's in charge of the NYU PhD program in data science, which is one of the first in data science. He's chief editor of the Big Data Journal, a publication that combines academic rigor and industry relevance. He brought machine learning to Wall Street in the 90s using big data for ruthless profiteering. But he has now had a complete conversion, right? Was that?
Partial, anyway.
A partial conversion. So more recently, he's been involved in big data for social good through an education project in India using large-scale telemetry data from mobile devices to provide customized education support for early primary education. This project is with the team that implemented India's UID, which is their universal ID project. The largest national identification project ever was 925 million people registered. So please join me in welcoming Professor Vasanta.
I think I have one. Thank you. Thank you, Tanzi. The part about ruthless profiteering was actually a joke. One of my friends, we published a special issue of Big Data on social good. And so one of my colleagues said, well, the next one should be on ruthless profiteering. We haven't quite done that yet. I just want to say a few words about the journal. So we're doing a special issue on trade-offs, social trade-offs between various things involved when you use big data. That's being guest edited, slotted for next March. It's being guest edited by Dana Boyd and Solon Barakas and a couple of other people. So we've distributed flyers for that. So if you are interested in contributing to that, please do so. And then we have other special issues. We just published a special issue in December on healthcare. And it's online, it's free access. So I encourage you to take a look. So with respect to today's panel, I couldn't but help note the sort of similarity, I guess, between what's going on in sustainability and sort of the 60s generally. And maybe this was prodded to some extent by a series I was watching on Netflix called The 60s. But I just couldn't help but make that connection. I mean, I think what we're seeing now is bigger, it's more global, it's more environmental, there's more education stuff, there's more awareness of race. It's just, I guess, 60s too, or a new element of it. So 60s 2.0, that's a good one. We're also seeing sort of an awareness. My kids seem to be particularly concerned about where something comes from and how it was made, all this kind of stuff. And we're just seeing more and more of that in younger people. At the end of the day, I think that will drive business as well, because at the end of the day, business cares about what customers think, and we're certainly moving in that direction. MSCI just came up with a new index on sustainable development goals, and I think that'll induce businesses to take this more seriously as opposed to paying lip service to it. Things are becoming more measurable. And that's where big data comes in. The whole sort of new wave of data is not just generated by humans, but generated by machines for consumption by machines. And as I've argued in a paper I wrote on data science and prediction, one of the key sort of criteria for what counts as knowledge should be prediction. I mean, if you can actually build models that are good at prediction, then that's a necessary but not necessarily a sufficient criterion for what counts as knowledge. And that's what big data is leading us towards. Just the ability for the machine to ask questions, to generate hypotheses, and to test them automatically. So we're getting to the point where machines are becoming capable of doing certain kinds of science on their own. And that's a whole sort of paradigm shift compared to sort of the traditional notion of hypothesis testing, where knowledge comes from the human and then we test it, right? So it's a whole new era where machines are gathering data, other machines are analyzing it and figuring out what's going on. So that's just a whole new level of capability that we're seeing. But we're far from that yet, especially in the area of sustainable development. I think what we're dealing with now, or asking ourselves, is what are the benchmarks, right? If we take the 10 SDGs, the major categories, how well are we doing right now? And I don't think we even have answers to that yet, right? So how well are we doing? What should our expectations be? And how should we go about measuring them? And hopefully that's what the panel will shed some light on. So let me just introduce the panelists. We will start with Robert Kirkpatrick, who's an innovator and entrepreneur working at the intersection of technology, policy, and social change. For the past 6 years, he served as director of Global Pulse, an innovation initiative of the UN Secretary General harnessing data science and sustainable development in humanitarian action. And now here's the best part. He's worked on 2 startups and spent several months living and working out of Saddam's palace in Baghdad. And he's working on other efforts in Afghanistan, Uganda, and Cambodia. Kirk Bourne is a principal data scientist in the Strategic Innovation Group at Booz Allen. He spent 12 years as a professor of astrophysics and computational science at George Mason University, and he's worked 18 years before that at NASA. He's an active contributor on social media, where he's been identified among the top worldwide influencers in big data and data science. Justine Dowden is a data analyst at Columbia's Earth Institute, where she helps to lead a research study about youth empowerment in South India. She's currently co-investigator of a research study that investigates how having access to sanitary pads and/or reproductive health education affects the psychological well-being of adolescent girls in rural Rwanda. And finally, we have Louis Coppola. He's a co-founder of the Governance and Accountability Institute, a for-profit sustainability consulting firm servicing the corporate, investor, and public sector, celebrating its 10th anniversary. Louis heads the Institute's sustainability effort report analysis team and the exclusive US, UK, and Ireland data partner relationship with the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI. Louis also is an adjunct professor at the Bard MBA in Sustainability program. So without ado, Robert, take it away.
Very good. Thank you so much. Let's see. Find a presentation here. Oh, no, that's Kirk's. Sorry, Kirk. Let's close Kirk's. Kirk Bourne and Kirkpatrick. There we are. Oh, they're already. Yeah. There we go. And down below. Very good. Let's see. Yep. No, but not there. Here we go.
Just some, I guess, rules here. Each of the speakers will have 15 minutes, at the end of which they will be rudely interrupted. So we'll have about an hour of speaking time at most, and we'd like to have a really free-flowing, open-ended discussion session following that. Good.
Very good. So, good evening. I'm going to talk to you tonight, unsurprisingly, about big data and sustainable development. Global Pulse is an initiative of the Secretary General at the UN focused on harnessing big data for sustainable development and humanitarian action. The project has been operating since, the early 2010, launched in response to the global financial crisis, when it's the first time that I think world leaders recognized the problem of living in a hyper-connected, fast-moving world is that 3 to 5-year-old statistics don't really tell you what's happening fast enough at the household level to stay ahead of the curve. So we started looking at data that was being passively produced in real time by people around the world. We act as an accelerator for innovation in this area from within the UN system. In 2013, the UN first called for a data revolution for sustainable development. A high-level panel said it's not just enough to evolve what we're doing, we need to completely transform the world of data in order to be able to achieve sustainable development. The world in which the SDGs are going to be implemented is very different than that of in which the Millennium Development Goals were implemented. In the last 15 years, traditional development data is something that is collected by governments, owned by governments, and used by governments. Today, as
Vasant said, data is something that is produced passively by people, collected by machines, and owned by private sector, and sometimes tapped into by governments. But it's a very, very different world, and that fragmentation is a problem if we want to turn this into the kinds of insights that we need to achieve the goals. Our hypothesis at Global Pulse is that digital services are sensor networks for human well-being. You can tell from the name, we're trying to figure out how to measure human well-being in real time, how to use online behavior, digital behavior, to make inferences about what's happening in the offline world faster, more efficiently, with higher temporal and spatial resolution than has been possible before. When we talk about data revolutions out there, we actually think there are three. Yes, one of them is about figuring out how we can use all of these new data sources to improve how we measure the SDGs. There are a terrifying number of SDG indicators, 230, maybe some added later. 230 indicators is a lot for a developing country to track. It's a lot for any country to track. And there will be a role for some kinds of big data in producing proxy measures of these. But we really think that it's actually not the measurement revolution, but the management revolution where we're going to see the greatest transformation. That's what analytics have done in private sector. This changes your business model. It changes how you make decisions every day, every hour, every millisecond in some cases. We see an opportunity to use real-time feedback from the communities where we're doing development work to be able to understand where there are emerging risks to the outcomes in the first place. It's not about measurement, but it's about achievement. And finally, big data is being collected by private sector. Government isn't involved in that process. As it becomes known publicly that you can see in real time when a policy is failing, that is going to have an impact the likes of which no one in the open data community has ever been able to imagine. Because government plays no intermediary role here. Accountability in real time is true accountability. What you're looking at here is a map of Jakarta, where we have one of our Pulse labs. This is produced by people tweeting. We have a lab in Indonesia in part because this country is a prolific producer of social media, 9 million tweets a day by some estimates coming out of Jakarta. When you filter out the sports and celebrity chatter, what you get is people talking about food prices and vaccination and not having enough food, to be able to, not having enough money. Lots of interesting signals. What you see here is a visualization from Easter weekend in Spain in 2011, produced by the Spanish bank, BBVA, that shows analysis of different kinds of credit card transactions over a weekend. You have groceries, gas, fashion, red is alcohol at night. And the point here is, of course, that every financial institution in the world can see in real time where people have money, where they don't, what they choose to spend it on, how much, when. Why don't we have access to some kind of information like that for policymaking? What you see here is a visualization of people in Japan on the morning when the earthquake hit that caused the Fukushima disaster. This is being produced by millions of anonymized records of how people with smartphones moved about the city. This is Tokyo. And what you're going to see is the moment this hits, boom. Behavior changes instantly. It's never been possible to see anything like this before. Now what you see is people, tsunami is a Japanese word, sensibly people are moving away from the waterfront, right, who know. The point is, you can see in real time through these new data sources how people move, how people are being displaced by an emergency, how they're moving in ways that could spread a disease, how far they're coming from to get to a health clinic or a school. So when we talk about big data, the Large Hadron Collider produces big data, but the big data that we see is relevant to development is really big behavior, right? Two general categories. There's data that's mostly publicly available in some sense, online information, social media, retail advertising, what people say. The really sensitive and powerful data is, of course, data on what people do. It's on human behavior. You can see some of the different types of data sources that we work with. But this data, of course, comes intermingled with personal information. So the privacy issues here are very serious. How can you unlock that information, the insights from that information, without placing people in harm's way in a new way? What's so different about this from a traditional perspective? We think of surveys. The traditional tool of development and policymakers is basically like photography. Big data is like video. Continuous observation of human behavior. You can see dynamics. This is something you can't do by taking an occasional measurement. So one way you can think about big data is basically like this is a new kind of natural resource, right? It's super abundant, it's infinitely renewable, it's all around us. It's passing through our bodies right now on the mobile airwaves. It's fallen prey to an extractive industry. We use the term data mining. Its benefits are not reaching those who need it most. The skills needed to unlock it in data science are very rare indeed. And unfortunately, it's not, in some ways, like wind or solar, it's a lot more like nuclear energy. Right? In its raw form, it tends to leak and contaminate. Right? Personal information is at risk. This stuff is dirty. So how do we understand it scientifically to understand the use and the risks? How do we engineer a containment vessel to keep it safe and extract the insights responsibly? How do we govern it effectively to make sure that we can use it and to get us to a society that we want to live in? Everything we do at Global Pulse is with anonymized data. We don't work with confidential information of any kind. We have our privacy principles online on our website. Our interest is in aggregate analysis, not in individual behavior. So about 4 years ago, we realized the first thing we have to do is figure out how to engage with private sector. So we began reaching out to different industries and talking about this thing called data philanthropy. Let's find a way for you to share some of the information that powers your business in a way that protects privacy, in a way that protects your own competitiveness, but could still lead to better outcomes. How can we innovate on top of these data sets and discover the opportunity cost of not sharing that data so that we can eventually build a whole new world of public good-oriented analytics running on top of all of these data sets. Just like you run BI stacks right now in your network to help you understand your customers and your markets, how can you track disease outbreaks, support better response to a disaster, better ways to measure statistics and progress on the SDGs? The response has been overwhelming. Companies from the start were excited about it as a new form of CSR. Now they approach us regularly unbidden, offering to work with us to discover how to use their data to achieve the SDGs. So we have a network of labs in New York, Uganda, and Indonesia, potentially more on the way, where we work with partners in private sector, academia. We have lots of fellows and interns who work in our labs, with companies, with governments, with UN agencies to identify high priority needs, develop, prototype, test, and evaluate new solutions. Let me show you some examples so we can make this real. Here we are at the World Cup. UNAIDS asked us, can we track what's going on around HIV in Brazil? Brazil is big on social media. So we ended up basically analyzing Twitter in Brazil in all 30 areas, all 30 cities where games were being played. The government, Ministry of Health, and UNAIDS had a program called Defend the Goal. HIV risk awareness program, trying to encourage people to get testing and counseling. We're able to map discrimination, able to see where people are talking about testing and counseling in different volumes. The idea here is where you can see less awareness of risk, more discrimination, you can reprioritize your advocacy and outreach efforts to a community. Indonesia, more on social media. Here you see a lot of parents in Indonesia talking publicly about why they don't intend to vaccinate their children. You see religious authorities talking about why religious beliefs that suggest you shouldn't vaccinate your children. The goal here is spot the meme rather than spot the actual outbreak. Again, if you can map where these conversations are happening, where people are responding to rumors, you can prevent kids from not getting vaccinated. Another project in Indonesia we did with the World Food Program, we found that when we compared millions of tweets about how people essentially talk about different commodity prices, complaining in the market about what they're having to pay for rice or chicken, beef, fish, to the official statistics, we get correlations 0.87, 0.85, 0.81. It's essentially a way to get a pretty decent inflation index for commodities just by looking at online conversation. Now, this is a business school, no hedge fund here. As soon as the prices drop, the signal dries up. But as long as they're high, you get quite a robust conversation going on. We call this complainalytics or wingenomics. So this is something that we're interested in exploring further. Nepal earthquake, we were asked by the World Food Program when the earthquake hit to start tracking different kinds of conversations. We were able to put together a taxonomy in 2 different languages, in Nepali and English, looking at different types of conversations around shelter, healthcare, water and sanitation, for example, and see where they were coming from and how the trends were changing. population displacement. So as you send and receive messages or make and receive calls through a mobile phone network, as you saw from Japan, your movement can be tracked. You can take these data sets in an aggregated way, anonymized, and you can see the movement of the population after a disaster. World Food Program asked us if we could develop a prototype dashboard that would allow them not to see where people were being displaced from, but where they were flowing into. Because if you could detect the spontaneous emergence of a camp, and you could see how many people are flowing into it every hour, and you put that on top of Google Earth, and you could see what's the travel time to that location, you can actually just know how many trucks need to get on the road to have the right amount of supplies for the number of people who will be there. So it's actually predictive disaster analytics is what we're talking about. So this is an area where we're, again, working to take this to the next level and test this operationally. This project was done with historical data from a flood in Mexico in 2009. Here you see, using mobile phone records again, human mobility information in Uganda to look at how we can see how people are spreading diseases from current outbreak locations to new locations. We're looking at this now and working with Google and UNICEF around Zika. We found that when you compare how people spend money on their phones in Uganda to how they spend money in general, we found that you get a 0.75 Pearson correlation here. So we're basically talking about a way to peer inside the digital wallet of a community. This is interesting because what you see on the left is the official poverty statistics for Uganda by province. On the right, we can go down to the sub-district level, and we can generate this every hour, if you wanted to, from a mobile phone network. And you can use predictive analytics to see where people are underspending against the predicted level. Economizing behavior is a sign of economic hardship. Postal data. We have the postal records from all of the postal traffic between 198 countries for 5 years. From the Universal Postal Union, we can actually generate proxies of GDP, life expectancy, CPI. And I think the last example here, we're working with speech-to-text technology in Uganda. We've developed a tool that essentially takes indigenous Ugandan languages and turns them into text from public conversations on the radio about HIV, disasters, agriculture, and then we can mine this the same way we would Twitter, so you can see what that looks like. Just to wrap up, what you see here is a mobile phone network. You think you know what that's for, but there's another way of looking at it. That can measure poverty. That can measure the effectiveness of a disaster response. The solar panels track how much sunlight hits them, which means they can tell you what the crop yields are likely to be in surrounding fields. The microwave shots connecting them get degraded when it rains, which means you could use this to detect flash floods. All of the services that are out there can be repurposed for sustainable development. Where does it get us in the future? We believe it gets us to the socioeconomic equivalent of meteorology. Today I can check temperature, wind speed, and air and cloud cover on 100 websites. I want to be able to do that one day for poverty, hunger, and disease anywhere in the world. But it's going to take a new ecosystem of partnerships, public and private sector, working together to make it safe and make it possible. Thank you.
Justine?
There we go. Okay. Good evening. I'm Justine, and I'll be discussing improving and reimagining data sources toward achieving equitable quality education. So specifically, Sustainable Development Goal 4, which is ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education. Specifically within that, eliminating gender disparities in education, ensuring equal access, and building and upgrading education facilities that are child and gender sensitive. So I see two ways of using data toward achieving SDG 4. One is improving existing data sources. So one very obvious one related to education is school attendance. And that's something that we're working on at the Earth Institute at Columbia University with the Truancy Assessment Project in South India. And the second is harnessing the power of data from more unlikely sources to better inform education policy. So going beyond just school attendance and looking at something like the link between menstrual hygiene management and school attendance. And I'm helping to run a study that investigates that link in rural Rwanda. But first, just why we're talking about this at all, why better data matters for the SDGs. So really, the lack of reliable data hinders government's ability to make informed decisions and enact appropriate education policy. If you can't pinpoint why your populations are vulnerable, exactly what they're up against, you're going to be going about trying to make them less vulnerable blindly. So the first way we can use data toward SDG 4 is improving existing data sources. So just to give you a little bit of a background on the challenges that we're facing with school attendance data collection, this is 3 things that we found in our work in South India. So first, subject to human error. It's pen and paper, ultimately. Anything could happen. And sometimes it's human error, and sometimes we actually do see some fudging of the numbers. And that's because of perverse incentive structures. So what we've seen in the communities where we work, whether or not a child attends school reflects on the teacher. So it's not the teacher's fault that the girl couldn't come to school because she had to collect water, and yet the teacher could be punished for that in the long run. So many people make the rational decision that you do want to paint a rosier picture if it means job security. And then also, we found that there's a difference in opinion about what chronic absenteeism actually is when you're talking to a researcher at Columbia versus a teacher or headmaster. So the internationally recognized definition of chronic absenteeism is 2 to 3 days missed per month for any reason, consecutively or not. And teachers felt that chronic absenteeism was more like if a child was gone for weeks at a time. So to address these challenges, we are conducting the Truancy Assessment Project. So TAP has 2 major components. One is e-attendance, which is an inexpensive and simple biometric tracking system that includes a fingerprint scanner that is paired with a tablet running on tracking software. So the child is marked present or absent, that data goes to a central database, which is then looked at and analyzed by education extension workers. And they will identify the absent student or the student who's displaying patterns of chronic absenteeism, and they'll actually visit that child at their home. So we're working with about 800 10 to 16-year-old kids in 10 schools in Telangana State, South India, who are in 6th to 10th grade, so secondary school. This is what e-attendance looks like. That's my finger. And this is the platform itself. And here are staff working with teachers about training them about facilitating data collection. So the teachers are the ones who are there at roll call with the kids. And we have several outcome variables, several types of data that we're collecting. So just the baseline demographic data that we get at the beginning of the study that is inputted into that tablet: name, age, grade, social support system, and family background as well. What level of education did your parents reach? Who's your primary caretaker at home? Obviously the school attendance via the fingerprint scanner, and then also when the EEWs, education extension workers, visit homes, they administer a questionnaire, which looks like this. It's just one question: why didn't you go to school the last time? So kids will answer freely, and then the EEW will mark on the tablet whichever answer fits best. So we have come up with a list of common factors. I just put everything here, but I had chores, take care of family members, I didn't feel safe at school, I was on my period, things like that. So linking back to the SDGs, as I said before, lack of reliable data hinders government's ability to make informed decisions. So we cannot be making good decisions about education policy looking at fudged numbers. We need a better way of doing that. And so if you use biometric approaches, then you're really decreasing room for error. The second way that I see data playing a role in moving forward with SDG 4 is harnessing the power of data from more unlikely sources to better inform education policy. So back to SDG 4, I'd like to talk about 4.5 and 4A, so eliminating gender disparities in education. Girls in developing countries and everywhere really have a different set of challenges altogether. And that separation especially is seen in secondary school, where they hit puberty and a whole new set of challenges comes up. So we need to do everything we can to ensure equal access, and that involves building and upgrading education facilities that are child and gender sensitive, making school a friendly place to go when you're menstruating. A little bit of background about the link between menstrual hygiene and school attendance. 1 in 10 school-age African girls do not attend school during menstruation, and in Rwanda, where we're leading our study, that's actually 50 school days per year per girl that are missed. So really opening her up to the possibility of dropout and then all of the distal effects of that have been widely studied. So when we talk about how to build infrastructure to get girls to come to school, this is what I'm talking about. So really simple things. There should be water in the toilet. Doors should lock. There should be doors should lock, and also there should be toilets for girls specifically. Even a trash can in the latrine really makes a huge difference. And this is not a place you would want to go to manage your period. This is southern Uganda. So in looking at all of these issues, we have developed a study that aims to understand how gaining access to sanitary pads and/or reproductive health education affects the emotional well-being of 10 to 15-year-old girls in this area of rural Rwanda. So I underlined emotional well-being because there have been a lot of studies, a lot of data collected about these infrastructure things, counting toilets at school and doing that kind of thing. But mental health is a much trickier and less popular thing to study, right? You can't use a fingerprint scanner to study mental health. So our objectives are twofold, so for the intervention component, we're providing one free reusable sanitary pad and then measuring the effect that that pad has on participants' mental health. And we're also providing a reproductive health education curriculum and then measuring the effect of that curriculum on participants' understanding of key related issues. So one group gets the pad only, one group gets the curriculum only, one group gets both, and one is the control. So this is the reusable sanitary pad. I don't have time to go into the mechanics, but I brought one with me if you're interested on how reusable sanitary pads work. It sounds gross, it's not. So intervention 2 is the reproductive health curriculum. This is your basic sex ed, goes into family planning and HIV prevention and things like that. This is the Kenya Rwanda version. Our materials and everything is done in the local language. So we are in Mayanje, Rwanda. There are 200 girls, and this is one of our 4 intervention schools. So we're measuring 2 things in this study. Via a self-administered questionnaire, which is about their menstruation knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors. How do you feel on your period versus how do you feel normally? And then quizzes about reproductive health issues for those in the curriculum arms. So this brings me to best practices in data collection, because with qualitative studies, like I said, you can't use a fingerprint scanner, right? So you really have to think about how you can foster an environment in which students feel they can be free to answer your surveys genuinely and accurately. These are sensitive questions about sensitive issues. And I did a training when I was in Rwanda last with teachers about this is principles of good reproductive health facilitation, but the same applies to when you're collecting data. So be approachable, patient, compassionate, don't bring personal bias in, and things like that. And then getting back once again to the SDGs. So we really can be measuring things like this, like the link between menstrual hygiene management and school attendance, as well as the mental health side of everything. But I only have 15 minutes, so we'll choose menstrual hygiene on a larger scale. So a lot of this work is being done on a pilot scale, 200 girls at first and things like that, and governments really need to take this on. And menstrual hygiene should be included as a variable measured for excellence in the education sector. It matters just as much as school attendance because they're so interrelated. And it should be incorporated into water, sanitation, and hygiene standards. It's WASH. Again, going beyond just counting toilets and thinking about mental health. Do not neglect mental health, because if you can do all kinds of things, right? You can build infrastructure and reduce school fees and blah, blah, blah. But if you're not getting to that key decision moment, when the girl says, I have my period, should I go to school today? You have to get inside her head. You have to be collecting data about what's going on at that key point and design your interventions, design your policies around that. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. All right, thank you all for coming. So my background is astrophysics. So you might be wondering how an astrophysicist gets here. Often people ask, what good is astronomy to the world? And I say that the importance of astronomy is the expansion of the human mind. I mean, to really understand our universe and how it all works and how it all fits together, and really understanding our place in it. And as a consequence of sort of the beauty and attractiveness of the sky, the night sky, and all these kinds of things, over my career, 18 years at NASA, 12 years at a university as a professor, always attracted many different individuals, researchers to work with who are outside the field of astronomy. And one of these guys said to me once, he said he really loves working with astronomers for 3 reasons. One, we have lots of data. Secondly, the data is really interesting. And third, the data has no value. Well, I didn't take that as an insult. He was being funny. What he means by that is it's free and open data. There was no charge for it. It has no commercial value. There's no protections on it. Anyone can access it. And so we're moving to that place now where open data, both at the government level and some of the things we've heard about how we can provide almost like safe harbor for commercial-owned data in a way that is not revealing of privacy-related issues or competitive intelligence issues for businesses, to use all of those data to ignite new discovery, to better decisions, and change our world. And so earlier we heard about this, the sort of the nuclear energy, the nuclear example, and it just struck me at that moment. It's a really great analogy, because the cleanest form of nuclear energy is fusion energy, right? It's not atoms splitting, which is fission. That's dirty nuclear energy, right? It gives off radioactive byproducts. Fusion energy is when you put those hydrogen atoms together and they fuse to make a helium atom and release enormous amounts of energy, which is what's happening at the center of our sun. So this is really the value of open data, large big data collections, fusing multiple data sources together such that the product not only becomes something new, but it releases enormous potential, enormous energy to do good, to make change in the world. So thank you for inspiring that ridiculous thought in my head about how nuclear energy applies to what we're talking about tonight. So in my years at NASA, I was always working with large data sets. I was involved with the Hubble Space Telescope, with the data system there. I was a manager on a project at NASA where we managed 15,000 different data sets for astronomy. And over the years, it became clear that the data sets were growing enormously in all dimensions, right? Okay, both in terms of the depth of data, the population sizes, as well as the width of the data, that is the number of variables we were measuring for everything, as well as the speed of the data. That is how fast we are collecting it and how fast it's coming at us. So we now call that big data variety, volume, and velocity, right? But it's really about all those dimensions. So often I say big data represents the end of demographics. We're no longer just doing samples, population samples. We have whole population studies now. And not only statically, but as was demonstrated so strongly already, dynamically. We can see it changing in time. Plus, it's not a single dimension of information, it's many dimensions of information. So over the years, and doing this and teaching it at the university for many years, I eventually got attracted and became principal data scientist at Booz Allen Hamilton. So just about a year ago, I did the scariest thing my wife thought I could ever possibly do, and that is resign from a tenured full professorship at a university. Yeah, okay. Kind of scary indeed. But what the group I joined there, the Strategic Innovation Group within this group, is basically focused on data for social good and also using data for basically in every client space we have. So every major federal agency, very large commercial clients, using data to improve decision, improve discovery, to innovate around data, using that information and those data sources to inspire new discoveries and better decisions. And as a part of that, of course, a lot of that is business related, okay, trying to make businesses and agencies successful, but also as data scientists, we are inspired to do that beyond just the business bottom line, but the social good aspect. And so this is a fundamental key part of our culture at Booz Allen, and it was all of those different things about it that really inspired me to do that big crazy step a year ago and leave the university. So that's sort of how I got here today. Okay, so I've been working in this space for a number of years, and one of the things that Booz Allen did in collaboration with Kaggle. How many people here have heard of Kaggle? Okay, Kaggle is data science as a sport, if you want to think of it that way. So it's a community of data scientists, over 500,000 from around the world, who actually compete for prizes to solve problems that businesses will put up a data set, and a problem they're trying to solve, and give prize monies for the best solutions, the best machine learning data science solutions. So one of the largest ones that was ever out there was called the Heritage Health Prize. I don't know if anyone ever heard of this, but the Heritage Health Prize was basically a $4 million competition. So a $4 million prize, you could probably retire after you win this one. The idea was can you use data, clinical data, health data, electronic health record data, electronic medical record data, EMR, EHR, using these data for patients who have been hospitalized to predict the likelihood that they will be readmitted. Because it turns out, I didn't know this myself until I read more about this, that hospital readmissions is a really big deal. Okay, so within the U.S. alone, it's like a $45 billion problem. Okay, that's with the B, right? $45 billion of healthcare costs, which come out of our pockets, right? These health insurance, these things we call health insurance premiums. All right, those costs were unnecessary because the person did not actually need to be readmitted, because there was something that wasn't done at the right time. There wasn't an intervention somewhere along the way that could have prevented the readmission. So if nothing else, if we could save our healthcare system $45 billion a year, I think it's worth giving a $4 million prize to someone who can do that. So seeing all this activity around the data science community, that is, like I said, 500,000 data scientists worldwide belong to the Kaggle community who want to participate in competitions using their skills to solve problems, not just in the jobs that they do, but again, these other activities. We started thinking about sort of like, this is really interesting. People really want to just do this on their own time. People want to do this, but there's not enough people who want to do this. There's this huge gap between the data volumes and the agencies and companies and nonprofits of the world who are collecting data and the number of analysts and data scientists they can hire to help them. That's the ongoing story in the world of data science, is this huge, big talent gap. There's not enough people. All right, so we got together with Kaggle. We said, you know what we really need is something like a national spelling bee or a national geography bee, and we'll call it the National Data Science Bowl. Okay, so it's a national competition in the same way that we could just put a problem out there and have people compete and see who wins. All right, of course, there's real money involved, so that attracts people, but also at the same time, it's people contributing because they just love to do that. So the National Data Science Bowl was born a year and a half ago, the first one, and it turned out the winner of the first one was some students and postdocs from the University of Ghent in Belgium. So this year, when we ran it again, we dropped the word national. It's now the Data Science Bowl. And I want to tell you a little bit about that. This is not the long story about it. There is a much longer story that I'm going to give you here. So it's basically this sort of culture and passion for data science that led to this, and teaming with Kaggle, which also is, again, this community. A little quote here from one of the members, I don't remember who said this, but we in the broader data science community share this common passion, culture, and vision for using data science for social good. So that's how we got here. So the first one, which ran a year ago, and the winners were announced in mid-March last year, was around ocean health. Okay, so the Oregon State University Hatfield Marine Science Center had been collecting images, subsurface sea images, videos. They just basically trawl a video camera back behind a ship, and they just go up back and forth off the coast of Florida, I think, in the Gulf, Mexico. And so they're basically, they have millions of images, which would take their scientists decades, if not millennia, to scan all those images, to classify all the plankton in there. And this is the goal, is to classify the plankton to be as a surrogate, as a proxy for ocean health. And I'll tell you about that in a second. Okay, so as I always tell people, one of the reasons we put these projects online like this is there's not enough graduate students in the world to analyze all your data. Okay, so we did a number of these in astronomy. We called them citizen science. Maybe some of you ever heard of Galaxy Zoo and other things like that. Okay, so it was truly born out of the concept that one of our grad students was tasked with classifying 1 million galaxies, and after the first month he got through like 1% of them. He swore, "I'll never do this ever again." So we put the thing online, and all of a sudden we have a community of over 800,000 volunteers worldwide who are classifying galaxies for us and all kinds of other things. So check it out at zooniverse.org. That's Zooniverse, as in zoo.org. So there's a lot of citizen science projects out there. So this is sort of like that. This is citizen data science. So why plankton? Okay, well, there's 118 different types of plankton, which is really, so therefore you just can't look at an image and immediately say, yeah, that's a healthy or unhealthy plankton of this type or that type. It takes a sophisticated expert to do that. And so the question is, can you train an algorithm based upon the labeled data that the sophisticated experts have done already? So the experts have already labeled some fraction of 1,000th of 1% of all the images that they, videos that they have. Can we now take those labeled data, turn it over to the community? Can you build an algorithm to do that? And yes, we succeeded in doing that. And I'll tell you how well in just a moment here. But this is just a little graphic which you can't read, so I just blew up the upper left corner there, which tells you why is plankton, why do we care about plankton? Well, there's a lot of reasons we care about plankton. It provides food for humans and marine animals. It produces oxygen, so this is part of the processing of CO2 from our atmosphere and putting oxygen back into our atmosphere. Okay, so this is a very important part of this climate cycle, processing and removing CO2. It contributes to global biodiversity. It provides biomedical products, and it's a major source of nutrients for indigenous populations. Okay, so there's lots of things that will fail or break if we don't have a good, healthy ocean. All right, so it really matters that we track this and intervene where we need to. But before you can intervene, as we've been learning about the SDGs, first you got to measure it. First you got to measure something before you can make a decision and know what to do, know what the intervention is. And the previous talk was a very clear example of that. You have to be able to measure something, for example, absences of girls from classrooms, before you can really start to understand go to the root causes, and let's design interventions and improve this situation. So in all cases, we're always talking about measurement and using that measurement to make better decisions and better outcomes. So here's a picture of the winning team. Like I said, some grad students and postdocs, University of Ghent. So it's amazing. There's these 121 classes of plankton. Okay, if you were paying attention, the previous slide said 118. That's because there's actually 121 classes of things that are being classified by the algorithm. 118 of those things are actual plankton. The other 3 things are smudges and smears and things which the experts just call it whale snot. Anyway, so they got 81% accuracy across 121 classes, which is pretty cool, because if you do any kind of completely brain dead classification algorithm, that is, you flip a coin, you'll get it right 1 out of 121 times. Okay, so you're less than 1% accuracy. So they got over 80% accuracy. There was 1,000 competing teams, 15,000 submissions. So we did it again this year. This year was around a heart health issue. Okay, so taking MRI scans, which are basically videos of beating hearts, to identify healthy hearts and unhealthy hearts. So I don't want to tell you that whole story, but this is the story of my life. So working with this team, I got to go to the American College of Cardiology conference last Sunday in Chicago. So what is that? That is the premier professional society of cardiology in the world. Here's an astrophysicist standing in front of an army of academic cardiology researchers, and it's again, the value of data science is it brings you in places you never possibly imagined, whether it's Rwanda or standing up that way. So it's not just about that classification, okay, so identifying that heart healthy or unhealthy. It's about saving lives, and this is an example of one of our, the son of one of our employees at Booz Allen, who actually was diagnosed with a heart problem when he was very young, like a 1-year-old, did the heart surgery, saved his life. Okay, this was before we had this algorithm, which now can do in seconds what an expert cardiologist needs 20 minutes to do. And oh, by the way, that expert cardiologist's time is very expensive, and maybe they only look at those scans maybe once every month, on the second Tuesdays of the month. All right, so if your child is about to die, you'd rather know within seconds when they're still on the MRI table than later. Okay, so data science, as we've been hearing about, big data is all over the place. And I'm not going to read through these lists because I've already been getting the warning to get. I see a big 0 coming at me. So it's everywhere: precision medicine, precision health, smart city, smart highways, personalized education. Okay, so I call it the XYZ of data science. Okay, so it's all these different ways we see it helping us. And this is the last slide. So for me, even though I'm not a sustainability expert, and I'm not going to claim I'm going to be one tonight, but it's all about measurement of things, collecting data, and of course the data we're collecting is very large, okay, and putting sensors on everything. We're now talking about the Internet of Things. So I just read an article today that even the cauliflower in the future will have its own IP address, okay? So you can measure how much water is there, how much nutrients are there, and actually intervene to the very individual head of cauliflower in a farmer's field. So okay, maybe that's a little extreme, but anyway, so the Internet of Things is this concept of putting sensors on everything, measuring and tracking everything. So my definition of big data, people have lots of definitions. Mine is the one up here you might see. It says everything being quantified and tracked. So I love that image of the traffic that you showed, where there's a still image of the traffic, and then there's the video of the traffic, right? So it's not just you have a one-time snapshot. You're seeing it dynamically. You're not only monitoring it and measuring it, but you're dynamically doing that. You're tracking it over time. So putting these things together, big data, the censoring of the world, censoring with S, not C, censoring the world, plus the citizen data science, to me, that's an ideal partnership for sustainability, putting all these things together to take what we can measure and turn it for social good, turn it for positive change, to ignite that nuclear fuel of discovery and innovation and decision making by combining data sources with the tools and the people who can put it together. And I saw an article recently, I really love this one, I just put it in quotes, or not in quotes, but I put it in here. SDGs are KPIs for the world. So. KPIs are key performance indicators. If you didn't know that.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Louis D. Coppola. I'm from Governance and Accountability Institute. How many of you in the audience know what this is? Okay, well, that's a good number of people. When I was 14 years old, I was a geek, and I may still be a geek, but I was a geek. Then I stayed inside and I played with computers when they were first starting to. In 1994, just starting to. The internet was just coming around a little bit later than that, and I had a dial-up modem in my bedroom. So I had this program called a war dialer at the time. It was called a war dialer. And what you did with this program is you would tell it dial every number from, 212-777-1000 to 212-777-2000. It would dial every number at night, and then I would wake up in the morning and it would give me a list of which numbers had computers on the other end. So then in the morning I would try each one that it came up with, and I would get different things on the screen, different companies, different bulletin boards. It was like a treasure hunt.
I'm not sure you should be admitting this.
So one day I
There's a movie called
dialed
War
in,
Games.
this will be even better then, because one day I dialed in and I saw something like this. It wasn't like this. It was more like text, and it said the same thing. It said basically, do not trespass. Violators will be prosecuted. This is, property of the U.S. government. So the FBI called my mom while I was at school the next day. And I came home from school, and my mom, she didn't know whether to be proud of me or, mad at me. I did get grounded for it. I did get suspended, in-school suspension for it. But the point is, I had a computer science background. I went to school for computer information science and computer science, double major. I got a job because I saw a job listing for a crisis and issues management consulting firm, and they needed a tech support guy. So I had no idea what crisis and issues management consulting was, but I knew how to fix computers and I knew how to help people. So I went and I got the job. It was good pay. So then I learned what crisis and issues management consulting actually is. And what it turns out to be is that we were helping companies who had crisis events occur. They were often in the environmental, the social, or the corporate governance area. We didn't call it that technically at the time. We didn't call it sustainability, but I would call them sustainability crisis events. So we had oil spills. We had drug recalls. We had the CEO and the board were working together to in the disinterest of the shareholders and different things like this. So I learned how companies would respond to a crisis event like that, build third-party expert groups, et cetera. We were acquired by IPG, Interpublic Group, one of the largest conglomerates in the world. A couple of years later, me and my business partner, Hank Warner, we decided the big corporate world was not for us. We were entrepreneur. We wanted to leave. We started G&A Institute. G&A Institute, we started with the idea that we would be proactive issues management, proactive ESG issues management, not reactive. So we were going to help companies identify material sustainability issues, figure out how to measure them, figure out how to manage them, and figure out how to communicate them in a structured way that could be used by stakeholders to make decisions. So that could be investors, that's one large stakeholder, but it also could be clients, customers, employees, NGOs, communities that you operate in, et cetera. So that was 2007. It's almost about 10 years now. And now fast forward 10 years and I'm here in front of you guys, NYU, Big Data and Sustainability. Somewhere in between that, how many of you guys know what the Global Reporting Initiative is? Okay, good. Well, the Global Reporting Initiative is the most commonly used standardized framework for corporate sustainability reporting. It has 84, well, GRI G3 had 84, this is the third generation of GRI. GRI was around since 1998 after the Exxon Valdez spill. It was first created. But it's now in its fourth generation, and we were asked to be the GRI's data partner, and what that means is that we're responsible for collecting every sustainability report that's published in the United States, and we analyze it for a little bit over 100 different data points, and we feed it to the GRI, which has a global database, which, there are different data partners from every country, and it all rolls up into a major database with now over 30,000 sustainability reports since 1999, going back to 1999. So one of the studies that we've done recently, which ties in, I think, a little bit into big data, you can call it small data, big data, medium data, it's data. I'm not sure if you guys would classify this as big data, but it's a lot of data points. We looked at 1,246 global GRI reports, and we looked at what were the disclosure levels in each of those reports across 84 different GRI performance indicators. So you said KPIs, key performance indicators. These are KPIs. So GRI has 84 different performance indicators. Some of them are, the company reports on biodiversity or Scope 1 greenhouse gas emissions, Scope 2, child labor, forced labor, human rights, right to organize, biodiversity, all different types of topics. Each indicator represents a topic. So we looked, does the company fully disclose on that? Because they can choose which indicators to disclose on, right? They don't disclose on all 84 indicators. The whole point is, let's look and see, well, you're an energy utility company. Well, there are certain indicators that are relevant to you because of your greenhouse gas emissions and things like that. If you're a consumer products company, it's a little bit different. If you're, mining, you have different issues that are material. So we look to see what are the indicators that companies chose to fully disclose, partially disclose, undifferentiated disclosure, which means kind of, well, they did a little disclosure, but we're not really sure. And no disclosure was, they just decided this was not material to our company and we're not going to disclose on it. And what we were able to do with that is come up with rankings for each of the indicators. And keep in mind, these EN16 may mean biodiversity, right? Each one of these has an underlying issue, so it's not just the numbers, it's the issue. I should have put the issue on there. But we looked at, we can take any group of companies, any universe of companies. So the easiest way is take a sector, right? We can take all the companies out of the 1,246 that are in the mining sector, run through the scores for all 84 performance indicators, and then we can come up with like a heat map and say, okay, if you're a mining company, here are the particular sustainability issues which other mining companies and investors that are, looking at sustainability in mining companies are considering to be material. So just, one example here, I can't go through them all. I mean, there's a report that you can download on our website, gainstitute.com. It's called Sustainability What Matters. It's, 300 pages long. But this is just a little excerpt. Like if you look at the retailers sector here, these are the indicators. These are the description, the short description of what the indicator would be. These are the top 5 indicators for the retail sector. And you can see things like transport, of course, transport of their products, heavily impactful. They're all over, imagine Walmart, the distribution system. You have, your procurement practices, your supply chain, a lot of risk there. This, some of these supply chains are in developing countries. There's all kinds of sustainable development risk. And you see things like customer health and safety. When you go to mining, you see a lot more environmental issues at the top. These are the top 5 out of 84. So you see a lot on biodiversity and on water because you're heavily using chemicals and different things in the mines, right? So this is just something that shows the 5 least reported indicators in all sectors, because I thought that was kind of interesting to look at. The number 1 least reported indicator is G4LA3, and that's return to work and retention rates after parental leave by gender. So not only can these be used to look at, if you're a company in a certain sector, what should I be focusing on? Or if I'm an investor in a certain sector, what should I be focusing on? Or if I'm a customer of someone from a certain sector, or whatever you're doing, you're an employee maybe. It can also be looked at as, what are they not doing that they should be doing? Right, so if you're an activist and you're an NGO and you're focused on a certain area, well, which sectors are not doing what they should be, and which sectors are, leaders in that area? We can also look at this data through countries. So we can look, we can say every mining company located in South Africa, and that is, above a certain revenue. So we can set the criteria to create a universe of companies, and then we can run this data, and we can come up with new scores. Now, the SDG Compass. The SDG Compass is something that we used as sort of like a Rosetta Stone, like a translator, to translate the GRI G4 indicators into the SDG targets. Now, we didn't put this together. GRI, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and the UN Global Compact. This is a joint project by them. And the point is to guide business action around the SDGs. But one of the cool things they do, which we took advantage of, is they map out each of the G4 indicators to the SDG underlying targets. So they'll say, well, here's EN13, this is biodiversity, and by the way, SDG target, I don't know offhand, I'm just making up a number, but 4.2 is also related to biodiversity, so they link the indicators with the targets. So now with this, we could take our data set that we have on 1,246 sustainability reports and the disclosure levels on all the indicators, and when we map them to the SDGs, we can now use the same data set with this overlying, I call it a Rosetta Stone, to look at what are the SDGs or the underlying SDG targets, because there's actually 169 underlying SDG targets under the 17 goals. They get a lot more specific as you get down to the 17. Which of these are organizations within whatever universe we said, a sector, a country, whatever, which are they communicating about the most already? So if you're a company wondering, here's these 169 SDG targets, which ones should I be worried about? Which ones am I already working in? Which ones do I have an impact on? Which ones do we have programs? Are we invested in? What's happening in the countries that we're operating in, where our supply chain is? This data can help to tell that. So I can't go through everything, but I pulled out some examples from this too. The top 3 SDG targets, now keep in mind this is out of 169 targets. These are the top 3 out of 169 for the chemical sector. So SDG target 3.9, it turns out by 2030 substantially reduce the number of deaths and illnesses from hazardous chemicals and air, water, and soil pollution and contamination. Makes sense for a chemicals sector company. So you can just see that these 2 other targets right here are also somewhat related to a chemicals company. Now you can take this list of 169 targets and you can sit around in a room and go through it with your management and try to pick out which ones are best, and I do recommend that you do that. But this is a way to kind of narrow down the focus on to the ones that you should spend a little bit more time on, a little more time discussing. Because if you look at the top, let's say 20 or 25, you're going to be able to have a little bit of a deeper, more in-depth conversation about the ones that are quote unquote material to your business. And this can also be used for investors as well. If they're looking at investing in these companies, which are the SDGs that are going to have the most impact on that company's ability to create value, ability to create competitive advantage, to enter new markets, to attract employees that are interested in their values. So when you look at the waste management sector, out of 169, again, we have SDG target 8.4. It's all about efficiency, consumption, decoupling economic growth from environmental degradation, and SDG target 12.2, it's about sustainable management and efficient use of natural resources. SDG target 12.5, reduce waste generation through prevention, reduction, recycling, and reuse. Those are the top 3 for the waste management sector. And we can do this with we don't have to just do a sector, we can do, like I said, countries, sectors. We could take an issue, like an SDG target, and we can then lay it over a map of countries and see which countries are actually doing companies within those countries are doing the most within those. One thing I wanted to mention, I'm on the board of a non-profit called the Global Sourcing Council. We have a program called the 17 Weeks for the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We're in week 6 right now, which is on SDG 6 for water. I just would like you to go to our website, gscouncil.org, and sign up for the newsletter. It's complimentary, and there's a lot of tools and systems, examples, that you can use to learn more about the SDGs and what it means to business, especially in the supply chains. Some upcoming research that we have coming up. One of the things that's interesting for this conversation, we're working with GRI, with their technology consortium, with a couple of other organizations to do, the main goal of this project is to unleash the data, they say. So, all this data is locked up in these large PDF sustainability reports on websites, like I said, 30,000 reports in the global sustainability database. Well, it's not very useful when it's all locked up in all this text. What do we do with it? It's unstructured. So the goal here is, this is like a Wikipedia site where people will be able to take the data out of the sustainability reports, load it into the site, and it'll be gamification systems to it, Wikipedia systems. And the goal is to make it just as easy as it is to go to Google Finance right now and type in a ticker symbol and get all the financial information about a company. Well, we want to do the same thing when it comes to sustainability data. So you type in the company's name and bam, everything's there. You can chart it out on graphs, you can lay it over maps. That's the goal of the WikiRate project. Pilot project that we're doing. You can check that out, wikirate.com, or at GRI's website. You can learn more about the technology consortium. And that's it. This is our website, gainstitute.com, if you want to download any of that research that I mentioned. It's available, publicly available. That's the nonprofit that I mentioned, the Global Sourcing Council. And these are just two links that I think are relevant to the conversation. The SDG Compass, it's a really great book to read. It's sort of like a PDF which explains why is this important to business, how do you go through the process of identifying what's important, and then how do you align that with your reporting. And then the Global Reporting Initiative. So thank you.
Thank you all. That's a fascinating set of talks. Before I open it up, I just have one question, and maybe Robert, but anyone can take this. So, you refer to the fact that a lot of this data is private. So what are the barriers to making these partnerships work without getting into thorny issues like violation of privacy and all of that? So how's it all going to work?
Sure. I think there are a couple of principal issues. I mean, one, without getting into the thorny issues, I mean, I think that you have a situation around data privacy where a lot of people hear the term big data and think of either government, a surveillance state, or kind of corporate profiteering in a very opaque way. I don't know who's collecting data from me. I don't know what's done with it. So partly you have people who feel like they have no rights over their data and are also unaware that they probably should have a right to have their data used to assist them, to empower them to hold their governments accountable, to improve service delivery and early warning. So there's a lack of understanding of the harm caused by non-use of the data and a tremendous fear over how it could be misused. That in turn causes governments to continue to focus on privacy to the exclusion of all else and thinking about the use of the data in terms of a regulatory perspective. Companies see tremendous risk in allowing anyone to access this data without written consent from all 50 million people in the database. And so as a result of that, you don't have the frameworks for ensuring safe and responsible use of the data that will make it legal and make it safe for companies to do this. And the other half of it is really the business model side of it. Right? There's a sustainability problem to this. We really think that for companies to start making the insights from their data that are relevant to the SDGs available and putting them to work for the public good, there'll be some of these kinds of insights that no company would want to hold on to, right? These are things like response to a disaster, stopping Zika, something like that, right? It's a clear public good. Not sharing that information if anyone knew that you had it would be a reputational risk to the company. But at the other end of the spectrum, you have things like poverty statistics, some of the SDG indicators. Maybe that's the sort of thing where government is spending $2 million a year to collect that information. You could produce that for a mere $200,000 a year. Maybe that's actually a business opportunity. Maybe you can monetize some of the less, at the humanitarian end of the spectrum kinds of information in order to hopefully not only pay for the cost of doing this data mining, but even drive innovation. What we want is companies around the world forming a market around information for the public good, where it makes sense for there to be a market, and competing to innovate around better ways to do that.
So did you get the data because you're the UN? I mean, how did you get all of that data?
It's interesting.
Those great charts and data flowing. We could never get that.
I would say companies are interested in this because the UN, they see the UN as a kind of a neutral broker, right? We have a mandate around development and humanitarian action, but we also have a mandate around privacy as a human right. So the UN cannot not use this data. We have to use this data because we know that it has a clear role in achieving the SDGs.
So do you see organizations like the UN being sort of the neutral party between the public and the data being used for public good and being collected by the private sector? That's what I'm trying to get at. How is it all going to work?
Well, long term, we hope that part of this, there could actually be a vibrant market and governance frameworks in place at the country level, at the national level. But in the near term, we're in this interesting space right now where you have this kind of inertia. Everybody's afraid to share the data because it's seen as radioactive, and time is passing. And so what we've seen from within the UN is that there is a role for the UN as a neutral broker. You can call it data diplomacy, if you will. There's a role for the UN to create a kind of safe space for discovery of how the information could be used, and what standards and anonymization methodologies and policy frameworks need to be put in place so that this can be simply part of how society works in the future.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on this?
I had a couple thoughts on this. One is the idea that you have to get the specific thing measured in order to understand it is one of the falsehoods, I guess, in the big data world. There are so many surrogates for different things that you can use a proxy for some of the things that you maybe can't or shouldn't have access to, or you would have to pay money to get access to, or some country or business doesn't want you to have access to. So, for example, I just reading this thing recently where I didn't realize this, but the government of North Korea, which some of you know is not exactly the most friendly nation on the planet, claimed that they had like a 250% improvement in their economic development in the last year, right? And so, of course, there's no insight into that country, inside their borders, to know what's going on. So what do you do if you can't get inside the borders? Is you just look at satellite images, okay? And satellite images, which as astronomers we always call the Earth at night, okay? So you can look down and see where all the population centers are by the lights that are on, right? So that's bad for astronomy to have all these city lights on, okay? But you can look at the electrification of countries, of cities, of urban and rural areas. That is, do they have lights on? If they don't have lights on, then they're probably not as economically well off as you might think. So you can use essentially the brightness of a pixel in a satellite image to basically be a surrogate for the economic prosperity or lack thereof of a particular space on Earth. So you can use these proxy measures, which are free and open. Again, they're not the data that you're looking for, but you can start making progress by using some of these surrogate things.
I just have one other question before I turn it open, and that's for you, Louis. I was wondering, the data that you were talking about, the GRI data, is that mostly self-reported? What's the quality of that, and how much can we trust that data? Because we're going to be, that has implications. We're going to be measuring it. How good is it? Where does it come from?
Yeah, so that is all publicly reported information. And the quality of it varies greatly. There are definitely challenges. Let's take greenhouse gas emissions, for example, right? Because this is sort of, I think, one of the most highly reported on environmental data point when it comes to corporations right now. And some companies will decide to, set a boundary of where they collect that data differently than others. So, one company will say that they will only include buildings where they have over 100,000 square feet, globally, or they'll and then another company who's a peer, a competitor, right, will decide to do the whole company. And then another one will draw it in a different way. Maybe it's the number of employees at a facility, right? So they draw that boundary of where they collect the data from. And it's not always easy to pick that up when you're looking at the data, especially in a data set. How do you have that contextual kind of information to allow you to be able to do comparability but from apples to apples between different companies? So there are now a lot of assurance. Assurance is a big thing now, doing assurance of the data, actually having accountants come in or an engineer and look at the systems for how they're collecting that data, how are they calculating the data, and putting like an audit statement, into the report. And now companies that have that audit statement in the report, that data is a lot more trustworthy. You've had an accountant who went through and double-checked all kinds of things. And now, even within that, there's different levels of assurance. So there's some assurance which is a very sort of, low-level review, and then there's other assurance which is really, really time-consuming, resource-consuming, but very trustworthy. So I don't know if that answers your question. It varies so much. We have a long way to go, for sure. Very long way to go when it comes to sustainability data.
Great. Let's open it up. Yes.
John Morris, Columbia University, former UN staff member. I'm actually fascinated by this. My wife has sent me here. And she is
Good wife.
appointed by the governor of Puerto Rico to be on a commission for for all public surveys. And she said, for God's sake, find out what they're doing to improve the quality of public policy data with this big data thing which everybody's talking about. My question is, as a research psychologist myself, there's a human subject issue here. All of the human subjects in your pictures, of lights on, cell phone use, all this. When I did experiments as a psychologist, I had to get permission from a statutory body saying that I'm allowed to collect data from this source. How do you deal with that?
Okay. So I understand what you're saying. I spend a lot of time with institutional review boards, and it is very difficult. But I also think that it's really important because with psychology or with certain sensitive issues, you shouldn't be looking at it like you look at whether their lights are on or, if they're stuck in traffic or whatever. If you're really asking about, in my case, mental health issues, or even issues that you might not even understand are sensitive because they're tied up in incentive structures or certain kinds of cultural practices you didn't understand before coming, you really do need that permission. So sometimes I think that it's worth the time to make sure you go through that process, even if it is frustrating.
Sorry, but in those enormous,
Right.
multi-million-dollar,
Yeah.
pixels, there's a person behind each pixel, in a sense, in some way. Certainly in cell phone usage. I mean, I understand your Rwanda example, where you can interact directly with the subjects of your interest. But in those other things where you're taking satellite images of all the individual people, there's still an issue there, isn't there? Or am I missing something?
So are you asking whether, let's say, Google and Facebook need IRB or Twitter?
Well, you're a volunteer when you you sign a little thing whenever you go on Google, don't you? And when you join Facebook, you sign on. There's always small print there somewhere. And I'm wondering whether I'm not against this at all. I'm for it a million times. But I'm wondering how you deal with the small print in this issue. That's all.
Go ahead.
I think part of the problem is that you're having more data grow faster than the analytical tools we have to measure it and use it for something, and the human capacity to understand it. And that looks like, look at climate change, for example. There's a lot of, 99.9% of the scientists say it's happening, and there's still more than 50 people in the United States, 50% of the U.S. population doesn't believe it. So how do you get people to take that pixel? And there's also, the trouble is the model, not only the models change, the data changes. So if you're looking at a light from cities as an indicator of economic activity, that was really good 5 or 10 years ago. But now they're using LED lights. Does that mean they got poorer because they're using LED lights in their streets instead of using sodium light? No. So it's really hard to get all these factors working together and trying to understand how it all works. And sometimes big data can be not necessarily better data. And we really should try to aim to get better data that we can actually understand. I started a company that was involved in analyzing environmental performance of publicly traded companies back in 1998 when very few people did this. And what we found is it actually was easier to do that if you had less indicators. A good example is the Association of Colleges and Universities that works on sustainability had an indicator that had 100 questions in it, and each one was worth 1 point.
Right, but you're not answering his question, which is what happens to IRB when it comes to using all this data? And I guess it doesn't really apply. I mean, IRB applies to people like us when we collect data and we have to go through a board to...
Well, it's not that it wouldn't apply to the UN.
I mean, does it apply to Google?
So that I think we have to differentiate what type of data we're talking about. I mean, when we work with data sets, we're dealing with there are different ways you can do this. One is data like the mobile phone data or financial transactions, these big data sets. By the time we see that data, it has had all personally identifiable information removed from it. Much of the time, it has been aggregated to a degree that is still designed to allow some utility, but to make it very, 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 very unlikely that anybody could be re-identified.
But
So
you still,
consent
you still
is
go
not
through
required.
IRB,
No,
right?
because
You don't.
consent is not legally required to reuse data if the personally identifiable information has been removed from it. If you have consent is required if it's people's personally identifiable information. If you take social media, when someone signs up for a Twitter account, they still own their tweets, but they're actually consenting in the agreement to allow their data to be reused by any third party who signed the Twitter license. Then you have the third option, which is that you actually have people consent to be studied. So you're talking about mental health. At MIT and with Mass General a couple of years ago, there was a study where I think a couple of hundred people carried a smartphone app around. These were patients at Mass General who were bipolar. And they would look at everything, their movement, their spending patterns, what they search for, keywords in email, and they consented to have their lives examined by this device. And what the researchers found is they were able to predict the onset of a manic or depressive episode before the patient knew it was going to happen. Once you have that model, you could then potentially develop an application that doesn't require their personally identifiable information ever to be shared, but could notify them or a physician if it was going to happen without crossing that line. So there are different approaches to this, and it really depends on what you're doing. But when in the world of big data, you talked about data fusion, the ethics issues are orders of magnitude greater than anything we've dealt with before the onset of big data, because there's so many difficulties with future-proofing one of these data sets.
Right. In fact, this reminds, I often tell my sociology friends that this is sort of the golden age of sociology, because you can actually observe social behavior at scale and have real data to test your theories. But I sometimes say, yeah, but we don't, Facebook's got all the data, and it's really hard to get that data. So and that's a bit of a dilemma, because you have sort of these, private sector is sort of data rich, and the researchers are relatively data poor.
And the people producing it are data ignorant. I mean, people are tweeting, hey, I'm going to the beach tomorrow, and at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, someone's breaking in the back window of your house. Don't do that. People aren't aware of how the data that they produce could be reused to harm them.
Yes.
So this question, I'm sure, always comes up, so I'm going to ask it again. You can understand that. When we talk about big data, we're always talking about data coming from the digital sources. And I think, what is it, like 40% of the world population do not have access to internet? So it's a big challenge. And I'm not saying all big data is biased. No, it's not. It's perfect in terms of what we had before. But how do you deal, especially, question to you, because you're working at UN, how do you deal with this fact right now that we still don't have data from a significant part of the population? And, there's kind of like, that they represent a totally different group than the group that we're actually collecting. And what are the next steps to deal with this challenge?
Yeah, it's a huge issue. I mean, we're an innovation initiative. So we're trying to figure out for the populations who are producing data sets now, how do we use them? Because penetration of digital services, mobile phones, other types of IoT is going to happen, and we're not ready for it now. For the populations that we have, where we could do this, we don't know what patterns to look for in the data or how to protect privacy. So there's that aspect of it. Another piece is there are data sets, whether it's the satellite imagery or, for example, what we're doing in Uganda around radio. We got 200 FM radio stations in Uganda. All of them are in internet coverage areas, and very few people in many of these rural communities have a smartphone to get on the internet. But we're able to turn the people calling into these talk shows publicly into text that we can analyze. We're sort of creating digital data in places where nobody really has a digital experience yet, except for the radio station owner who has a smartphone to run the shows. So that's an area where we think we can begin to get some signals on the other side of the digital divide. But a lot of this is sort of really forward-looking. What is the world going to look like in 10 years? How do we want development programming, policy, community empowerment through data to look?
How about someone from this part of the room? Go ahead.
So this is a GRI question and kind of following up on the data points. So as it happens, I just did the GRI training last week. I'm not a data scientist. I'm an environmental attorney in the public interest sector, but also MBA and feeling around this metric stuff. So I haven't used it. My question is two parts. Could you talk a little bit about your feelings of the changes from G3 to G4, and maybe then comparison to integrated reporting framework or SASB or whatever? Because if my understanding is right, it seems like G3 took a more comprehensive approach. Was that more useful for your data analysis? I was a little skeptical that the G4 seems almost to be, if I'm understanding correctly, a step back, and the materiality process seemed like it gave way more flexibility to just pick your successful pieces instead of going through it all and simply saying this isn't relevant to my business, or
Okay.
these frameworks, what has more teeth and value?
Can
Yeah,
you just,
there were a lot of
can you
questions
just
in there.
briefly
Yeah.
paraphrase some of that so the other people who may not have heard the question know what it was?
Yeah, well, the question was about reporting frameworks, right? GRI G3 is the generation 3 of the GRI's framework. GRI G4, which was just released, I think, around 2 years ago now, is the newer framework. And then she mentioned a couple of other reporting frameworks like the integrated reporting, IIRC. And I think you also mentioned, SASB is one, and then also you mentioned another one, though.
I think just those.
Okay.
I'm not as familiar, I just did the GRI.
So moving from GRI to 3 to GRI 4, there was a big focus put on materiality. That's what you mentioned, where you say, like kind of cherry pick the indicators that you want that are the best for your company. That's not necessarily the way you're supposed to do it if you follow the framework. Now, if you're a company that, just does it the way you want and, picks the parts of the framework that you want to follow and doesn't follow the other parts that you don't really like, then yeah, you could go about it through that process. But the process should be, a stakeholder inclusive materiality process, some sort of engagement with customers and employees and NGOs and others involved, investors. So, there always was materiality. This is not brand new in G4. G3 had a materiality assessment as well. There's a new focus on materiality now. But it really didn't change that much. When you look at the two next to each other, the materiality portion, how to define the report content, is very similar. The indicators expanded, a lot of governance indicators, some on pay ratios, which were challenging in the US. Highest paid person in a country and the median paid person, and what's the ratio, and then also the increase in pay. What's the ratio of the raise that the highest paid person got compared to the median person? So those kind of indicators have caused some, discussions and delaying on taking up GRI G4. Just real quick, SASB, Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, you asked about also. This ties into the quality of the data, because the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board is designed to be for the investors only, right? That's the stakeholder. GRI is multiple stakeholders. This can be used by NGOs, by governments, by everybody. SASB is defining materiality as the SEC and the Supreme Court defines it. So their bar is much higher. They have much less indicators, actually, in there, much less material issues, and they want the information in the 10K. So by putting it in the 10K in the annual report, you have a much more rigorous process where, the board is involved and, the CFO and the lawyers and everybody has to get involved, and you have to make sure that's accurate, because if you put wrong information in the 10K, you could be sued big time. For false information or leaving material information out of the report, you can even get in trouble for. So integrated reporting, all of these frameworks are interesting. I think GRI is the most widely used. So when it comes to comparability and familiarity, and and it also links to a lot of other frameworks. So if you do a GRI report, you can link some of the indicators out to CDP, out to IIRC, even SASB now. There are some linkages between them. So I always see GRI as like the base framework, and then as you get more mature with your sustainability program and decide to invest more resources into it, you consider these other frameworks. SASB, not one company yet has reported using their framework. We're anxious to see, the first reports come out there. I hope I answered the question. I don't want to take too much time because I don't think it was that related to data that much, but it's a very interesting question. Right up my alley what I'm involved in. So.
The question was really from a data standpoint,
Okay.
which is most useful for analysis. But
So anything that is a standardized framework is much more useful than just a non-GRI report, let's say, which the data is just all over the place. The key is you have KPIs, which are key performance indicators, and the content index in the back of the GRI report that lets data be collected much easier. So if you collect the data out of a non-standardized non-GRI report, it might take hours, to go through that report and identify where those pieces are. With a GRI report, you open the last page. Here's the content index. I want greenhouse gas emissions, bam, it's on page 32. I flip to it, I pull that number out, I put it in the data. So we're getting closer to having a structured data. Next thing is XBRL. That's really where we have to move towards is, a standardized markup language where the information can be imported and exported into different data sets, and it's standardized in a better way. But
Gentleman in the back.
Each of you is an expert in this cusp of a new age, the data, the big data sets, the better data sets. Well, where are we in the sense of 5 to 10 years from now? Because as you point out, there's a lack of the analysts who are looking at this stuff. And where do you see, either in your own field or collectively, where are we going to be? Because 10 years ago, these weren't what they are today. Now we have a lot of information from these, and yes, some of the world doesn't have these, but the larger issue is it's spreading. Who would have thought 10, 15 years ago this is what it is? So the question is, 5 to 10 years from now, in this room again, what would it be like?
Well, I'll try to answer that by first not answering it. So about 17, 18 years ago or so, when I was working at NASA, we were providing access to NASA space science data sets, 15,000 of them. And one of our jobs back in the mid-90s, when the internet was just blossoming, was to put all this stuff online and to have all kinds of documentation and search tools, blah, 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 blah. And so one day I said to my colleagues, I said, we should really have a version of our web page that can be viewable from a handheld device. And they said, who would ever want to look at a web page on a phone? Okay, so it was just like such a foreign concept. I mean, I was shouted down during this meeting, right? And so the point of that is that, right, there's no way we could even imagine what 10 years from now, 15 years from now are going to look like because what's happening today we couldn't have imagined 15 years ago. But what I see happening is there's an acceleration in two things. There's an acceleration in the number of programs that are training data scientists, data analytics specialists. Okay, so sort of filling that gap. But the gap is growing by itself just by the explosion of data, the data volumes, but also the number of places data are collected, the number of agencies, companies, businesses, nonprofits, et cetera, as we're just learning tonight. I mean, if all these businesses and countries are going to start tracking all of these indicators just by that self, we're generating a whole new industry, so to speak. So how are we going to keep up, even though we're accelerating the number of analysts, but also accelerating the number of opportunities or gaps that we need to fill? And I think what's going to happen, my just opinion, is we're going to be automating as much as possible sort of the standard discovery processes around data. That is, if you're just trying to identify patterns, trends, behaviors, predictive models, and what our algorithms are going to get really better at, and my students and I have been working on this for many years at the university, is what we call the surprising index, okay, so, or interestingness index. Okay, so you won't find that in a statistics book. They normally call it outlier detection, right? But that's such a pejorative. I mean, I hate calling it outlier detection because that sounds so negative, right? Anomaly detection, sounds so negative. But it's finding the interesting thing in your data set, the surprising thing, the thing you didn't expect. And so that's the triage that we need to do on our data. Not find me the thing that an algorithm can find for me, for example, the trend line or some kind of predictive model, or identify where there's drought on the earth from some satellite image. You don't need a human analyst to do that, right? But you need that human analyst to deal with the edge cases, the ones that are anomalous, that are different, that are surprising, that are unexpected. And so as our data grows, we're going to get smarter and better at having algorithms find the sort of the easy things. I hate to use that word, the things that are predictable by an algorithm. And what's going to be left are the hard cases that this growing army of analysts will have to merge with domain experts. Right? So an astrophysicist can sit in a room with sustainability people and not be like wondering why I'm here. Hopefully you're not wondering why I'm here. Because for me, data science has always been a transdisciplinary science that transcends discipline boundaries. So we can have the conversation around data no matter what discipline it is. And so I think that's what's going to happen. We're going to start seeing more people having conversations around data who are data scientists with domain experts, whether it's sustainability or smart traffic or smart cities or whatever it is, and actually improving our ability to learn and innovate from data just because of those conversations are growing out in the population at large, so to speak.
And I'll add to that.
Go ahead, Justine.
Right now, one of the problems that we are up against a lot is remote populations. And I think that in 5 to 10 years, everyone will be getting less remote. So in 2011, when I was working in India, not with the Earth Institute, to collect data through focus group discussions, I took a plane to a train to a bus to a tractor to a walk through the mud to get my data. Like, that's crazy. You can't expect people to do that. And so we are using tools. We have, radio is a great example. Health, if you've heard of that, mobile health, using cell phones to collect data about, vaccination and maternal health and things like that. So I think that we'll see a lot of tools being developed that are realistic to the environment, expanding to also expand our reach.
Yeah, I'll just say, I fully agree automation is going to be absolutely key in this. You've got to have as much human know-how being automated as possible. This does create employment issues, but I think it's going to be critical. I think the real issue is going to be deciding what to look at and what should never be looked at by, what should never be looked at by a human at all and is only safe to have be looked at by a machine. Imagine how many of you are wearing an Apple Watch right now. It's not hard to imagine, the research they're now doing using machine learning on fMRI data, and they're starting to be able to see what people are thinking. Like, have somebody read a text and see the brain activation patterns, and then they can have someone think a sentence, and in many cases they can actually tell what sentence that person thought, right? The notion that your subjective experience is sacrosanct is going to go away. It's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, I don't know. But eventually, there will be a lot of people in the world who are wearing a device that tracks what they think, and they do it voluntarily, what they think, what they feel, everything people say around them and everything they do, everywhere they go, everything they buy and sell, and the relative status and functioning of every organ in their bodies. And the benefits that will accrue from them could be tremendous, and the abuse and human rights violations and horrors that can result from that could be quite comparable. So how do we understand these risks? How do we create a society that brings us to a future that we want to live in? A lot of it is going to require automation, but will there be cases where you have a black box and an algorithm looks at that and can tell a person you have a problem over here, but it won't necessarily always be able to tell why it knows that? We're going to be into a lot of interesting spaces we haven't thought about before.
If I could just make one small comment.
We've got exactly 3 minutes left, so keep it
in the
brief.
data science, I just want to make this point. In the data science bill we just ran with heart health, so when I was at the cardiology conference, one of the key successes of this that the cardiologists themselves mentioned from our data science bowl is that the algorithm is going to be able to identify very cleanly the healthy hearts. Okay, so right away you got an automatic solution. So you don't have to send all those to that very expensive cardiologist. But the edge cases, the ones that are sloppy, that are hard to understand, that are indicating some abnormality, that's the one where the human has to look at the data. So the automated algorithm helps to identify the ones that the human still needs to look at.
Yeah, good.
Hi, I'm a graduate student here at NYU Marketing Analytics. So most of our jobs and the courses we concentrate on utilize data with the marketing aspects. But I'm also an international student from China. As probably you can know, some of the countries in the world that kind of block their domestic data from the other entire world. So I believe there's a huge political issues involved apparently and some cultural influences. I was just wondering, maybe the UN has some sort of like program or diplomatic help to sort of solve these barriers because I believe by the future the integration of the whole world, like the international data would be that would be the future. I mean the global data integration.
Sounds like a UN kind of thing.
Yeah, and unsurprisingly, it's hard. It's a hard issue because it's a sovereignty issue. I think the main issue is that each country has to decide how comfortable they are with everything from freedom of speech to citizens being part of the global digital community. I think what the main issue is that it's getting harder and harder to block people's access. There's a bit of a cat and mouse kind of arms race between citizens and governments we see all around the world in terms of people attempting to join that community through whether it's Tor, VPNs, various ways that people get online. The jury's still out on that, but it's a case where you see the UN's role is very much a platform for the member states themselves, and that issue is unresolved.
Everybody saw Mark Zuckerberg trying to move to Beijing. That sort of hit the top news a couple weeks ago. I think that's definitely a corporate move to get more data out of the Chinese market. It's like huge markets just missing from the global population as a marketer.
Thank you. I actually want to kind of piggyback on the last two questions and ask you guys this. So we find ourselves in a place where we're generating all this data. We're only, it appears to be that the generations are just going to increase. There's a lot of value in it. But my question is more from the ethics and more like the distribution of this. I think there's going to be there are private companies who hold this data who are due to profit a lot from analyzing, from getting this insight. I know that there's a movement now, like as you said, to kind of get that data and open it up to access to the rest of the world, right? But so, how is this going to change the dynamic of income inequality within the nations, across borders? I guess that would be the question.
I would just say the one thing you're going to see is, real-time information on human behavior is like, once you can begin to analyze that, it's like gaining new senses. It's like being able to see in parts of the electromagnetic spectrum that you couldn't see in before. You can see things that were invisible before. And from there, the step is, well, who gets to see that? Once you can actually shed light on issues like income inequality, if we can use let's say the Gini coefficient of spending patterns on mobile airtime in Rwanda, for example, and be able to produce a map of some reasonably useful proxy of income inequality, and nobody's been able to see that before. And then you can see how that changes year to year based on government policy. Where is government policy making it worse? Where is it making it more effective? Right? Where are you seeing improvements or worsening? There's an accountability dimension to that. It creates a feedback loop that should empower citizens to hold leadership accountable for those consequences. It isn't, if it's not done correctly, it can also be used to harm. Right? But I think there's a potential there for these kinds of insights to serve as a tool for empowerment for citizens.
Is there anyone from MSCI here? I mentioned the MSCI index. No? I was hoping that they'd give us some more color on how that was computed and data quality issues and all of that. Any of you know anything about that? No. All right, so it is 8 o'clock, which means it's time to wrap up. I really thank you all for coming. I want to thank Tansi Whalen and Michael Block for organizing this, and to Sophie to making it all work. So thank you, everyone, and thank you all for coming.